three dots in it that is labeled More, then one of the options there is closed captioning. So I'm going to start off by just briefly introducing ourselves. And the Molt Search program, this is a partnership between Washington State University and WCU Extension, between Washington Sea Grant and WCU Extension, along with a number of other local partners. And there are three of us who keep things moving along. I am Cheryl Lovato-Niles. I'm the Water Resources Educator for WCU Extension. And Jonathan Robinson is the Beach Watchers Program Coordinator, also for Extension. And then Lisa Watkins is the Community Science Specialist with Washington Sea Grant. And we also work alongside a number of great local trainers who keep this work going in more and more communities across the Sound. And here we all are at the Spring Train the Trainers event. And if you are interested in bringing a Molt Search training to your local community, please contact us and let us know. Today's plan is we're going to do a brief introduction or refresher, depending upon your background, to Molt Search and what Molt Searchers like you accomplished last year. Lisa's going to tell us a little bit about that. And then we're going to learn about green crab status and trends from Emily Grayson, who is a marine ecologist and the Washington Sea Grant crab team lead. And then Hannah Brown is going to tell us about how she's using that Great Dungeness data that you're collecting in her graduate student research. And with that, I will kick it off I'll pass it over to Lisa.
Great. Thanks so much, Cheryl. Let's get going today then, shall we? And we'll start with this question of why Molt Search. But to begin, what is a molt? Starting us off on the same page here. And this word molt refers to this shell that the crab sheds every single time it grows. It sheds its own shell, slips out the back. That's what we're watching here in the sped up video. And then when it emerges, it's about a third larger, and its old shell then floats around in the water to be washed onto a nearby shoreline with the rest of the seaweed and driftwood and everything else that gets left behind by the receding tide as a sign that there is a living, growing crab of that same species somewhere nearby. So Molt Search makes use of this molt as a way of keeping track of who's living nearby and looking for signs of two specific species, the European green crab and our native Dungeness crab. But before we get too far along, we'll have some of these throughout. This is a lightning round where you get a chance to chime in on the chat. How big is a molt? How big are we talking here when we talk about molts that we look for as signs of crabs on the shore, crabs living nearby? How big are we talking? All sizes, yeah. They can be as big as a crab is large, but crabs grow much more frequently when they're young, and size correlates to the age of crabs. And so as they're young, they're shedding their old shells more often, growing into larger sizes more often. So you're likely to find much more very tiny molts on the shore. So one way to kind of train your search image as you're looking during your molt searches for these guys is keeping in mind how tiny they can be. They're as big as a crab, which is often very small early in its life. So back to this general question, why molt search? And it relates to this crab that we're looking at here. Who is this guy? We'd be remiss not to start by introducing the star of the show. This is the invasive European green crab. And with crabs, like many of you know, what we look for to distinguish this particular crab from other crabs is not actually related to its color, despite its name. We focus on a few features, namely their shape. This one is a bit of a like the cross section of a diamond ring or some sort of pentagon, wider than it is long. And also, the unique number of spines that it has on the outside of its eye. Crabs of the same species will be the same shape and have the same number of those points. European green crab have 5 points on the outside of their eye, the only crab in Washington with just 5, and we can count them, Green, green crab have 5 spines. And it's this species that motivated the start of this program, keeping an eye out as this brand new invasive species that's been in inland Washington for just over a decade is all, keeping watch on our local shorelines for signs of its spread further into the Salish Sea. So let's talk about program motivations for Molt Search. There are 3. We started this project to fill gaps on available resources for managing and keeping watch for these crabs. We thought that the public living on local shorelines, maybe with access to private beaches, certainly with the ability to go between areas that are already being tracked and already have resources available by seasonal and full-time technicians to set traps and to manage their populations, that Molt Search would help us expand those early detection efforts. We also designed the program to inform the public to make sure, ideally, that every person in Washington walking the shore would know how to identify a European green crab if they saw one, know that it's an issue that we should continue supporting with our state resources and attention and research, and know what to do when they found one. So Molt Search and the trainings that we give is serving this purpose, as well as making sure the protocols that we ask for everyone who is, informed on the topic to follow, making sure those protocols are also developing a data set that is immediately useful and being utilized by natural resource managers and researchers. And you'll hear today that it is already in use and is proven useful. So these are the 3 motivating goals for Molt Search as a program. And let's talk about how the last few years have gone. As a program, we started in 2023. So we have just now 3 seasons of Molt Search behind us. You can see some seasonal trends in the number of reports we've gotten more and more over the years, with a very big summer blip that you're seeing in the number of reports per month here. And that's driven by our summer Molt Blitz, where we try and get one snapshot of where molts are across the whole sea, trying to drive the most molt searching in one day as we can. We'd love to have you all participate in that with us this year on the 26th of June. And as the years have gone, we've gotten more and more reporters, more and more reports. This past 2025 season, we got about 850 reports. We're hoping that this season you all can help us get to our first season of 1,000 reports, and also try and level out this line, getting more data in winter months, getting more understanding of how crabs are growing and where they're living throughout the year. So glad you all can join us here today. Let's also talk about the work that the Molt Search program did last year on that goal of expanding early detection efforts, because that side of the program is proving useful too. A few different vignettes. I want to mention one in detail, but we have examples of people going on vacation on southern Whidbey Island and having just gone to a Molt Search training, stumbling upon a European green crab molt and being able to alert the state that, wow, European green crabs are showing up in this new geography too. We have an example from Hood Canal, and and Dabob Bay within Hood Canal of a neighbor who got trained up on molt search just because they were curious to learn more about native crabs on their shore, went out onto their local neighborhood shoreline and found several European green crabs over the course of many searches there, and then called us up and said, with their reports, they were asking questions. There's an option to like add a comment as you report. And the searcher was asking, oh, what's being done about these green crabs I'm finding in my backyard? And we interface with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, who's the state lead of this. With every green crab report we get, we pass it right along to them. And they were able to tell us, oh, the reason why there's actually not so much management being done in Dabob Bay is because it's all private shoreline. We have a really hard time getting traps in the water there because our access is restricted. And this molt searcher said, oh my gosh, here's a call to action, and started knocking on neighbors' doors and securing access for the state to be able to come in and map and manage that population in their backyard. Another example, just briefly, is of a molt searcher that has been going out every month to the same shoreline, finding nothing but native crabs until one time last fall when she stumbled upon a European green crab on that beach for the very first time. And thanks to, sticking with it all those years, she was able to spot that first European green crab to be detected in the North Whidbey Basin that had likely come straight through Deception Pass as a larvae at some point and been deposited there. And her detection led to a big trapping effort in response. So molt searchers are having a real impact on our early detection efforts in the state. You can take a look. As Sea Grant, we maintain a map of where detections of European green crab have been made across the state of Washington. This map, which is, you can see the URL there, includes all detections made through molt search and other trapping efforts and any other community detections and professional detections through the end of last year. So you might find interesting to scroll around in your neck of the woods and see what the status of European green crab is today. Emily Grayson's here to talk more broadly about what's going on with green crab in Washington. So get your questions answered while we're together today. And just briefly, because we are not using this as a training opportunity, this really is our season kickoff to whet your appetites for those of you who have already been searching to see some of the bigger picture. But for those of you new to the program, just briefly, what these protocols of molt search look like are a search of any shoreline in Washington at any time of day or tide, at any frequency, every week, every month, once ever, all useful. And these searches are standardized by a common time. So every report that comes to us is a culmination of exactly 20 minutes of effort, whether that's done by one person setting a timer for 20 minutes or two people searching separately for 10 minutes and bringing their collections together, or if it's a group of up to four, that time of 20 minutes is subdivided. So it's standardized by time. All molts are collected Easter egg hunt style during that time. And then the report itself is a photograph of the whole collection from overhead with something for scale that gets submitted to us at Washington Sea Grant through an app called My Coast, made by Blue Urchin. And that app can also be accessible through the website, but that allows us to get just a little bit more information beyond just the photograph you're submitting. It includes an option for you to submit a count of European green crab molts that you found, a count of Dungeness crab molts that you found, and even for those green crab and Dungeness crab that you might have found, a measurement of how large they are, since that gives us a sense of time. So that is our overview of, this program at large, where we've come through from, where we are now. And I want to pause here before we move into this green crab status and trends that Emily Grayson will share with us, and just ask if there's any broad questions before we get into some of these more specific topics for our kickoff together today. Well, seeing none come to mind immediately, the chat is always open, but I will now kick it over to our first guest speaker of the day, Emily Grayson, who is Crab Team's lead. So she is in charge of even this program and all of Washington Sea Grant's green crab related programming, including our research programs, our support of other partner trapping efforts, our support of the state of Washington, making sense of all these data. And I would encourage you to listen in with a curious eye on what questions, a curious ear on what questions you may want to answer, what questions you may have heard from your friends and family about what is going on with green crab here in Washington, what's happening in your region and your neck of the woods. And I'll let Emily from here take it away.
Thanks, Lisa. And it's really nice to virtually meet many new faces and also see some familiar faces. So thanks for joining for lunchtime today. So as Lisa mentioned, that one of the roles that I carry is to try to bring together data from across Washington State beyond just the crab team programs that include both Molt Search and the monitoring network, but also working with a lot of the tribes, agencies, federal and state agencies, shellfish growers, and the groups that are doing sort of what we might call management work, and that includes a lot of high intensity trapping and trying to do population suppression as well. It's a lot of different groups. There's like 50 groups working around the state right now. So as you can imagine, it's a big task to try to bring together all of this information. One of the ways that Crab Team does that is we annually host what we call a Trapper Summit, where all of the professional trapping practitioners in the state are invited to a one-day workshop and bring data together and sort of co-learn together. The figure that is up right now is a snapshot of the 2025 statewide trapping or capture rates. So what that means is that this is a way that we estimate or it's sort of a loose proxy for the size of or density of a green crab population at a site based on how hard we're looking and how successful we are at finding green crabs when we look. So what this map is showing you, there's a dot every place in 2025 that somebody looked for green crabs using traps. This doesn't include the Molt Search survey effort, which would have a lot more dots on it. And if the dot is white, that means that people set traps for green crabs but didn't find any evidence that they were there. And the red dots are places where green crabs were found, and the size of the dots is scaled where larger dots indicate denser populations. The metric that we use is called catch per unit effort, and it's the numbers in that big legend on the right are roughly the number of green crabs that you would expect to capture on average if you set 100 traps. And so you can see that in some areas, those dots are pretty small, and you would have to set at least 100 traps to catch even one green crab. And in some of the coastal estuary spots, there are a lot of people looking in a lot of places, and almost everywhere that anybody is looking, we're getting big bubbles. We're getting a lot of European green crabs coming up at, these really, what to us feel, I think to anybody, it feels like a very high number of green crabs where each trap has somewhere, as many as 50 or more green crabs in it on average. And, this is a change that we've seen over time as well. So this is everywhere that green crabs were found in 2025. And we have been doing this work for roughly the last decade and trying to characterize the trends over time such that we can track whether management is having an impact and whether the population is changing, due to environmental factors and et cetera, even as everybody is working to slow and halt the invasion as much as possible. Next slide, please.
Would you be open to stopping here to answer this question for Mona, which is
For
for
sure.
trapping, how long is each trap set out typically? And is the trapping protocol consistent across the region in this map or across efforts even outside of the map?
Right. Super good question. This is like this is a lot of information summarized here, and it's helpful to imagine like what this actually looks like in terms of what data went into this. So these traps go in the water for at least a single night. When we trap for green crabs, we know that they are most actively attracted to bait and willing to enter traps on a nighttime high tide. So that's the best time to be setting traps for green crab. And we also, the best practice in the state for everybody working is to revisit the traps at least every single day to release any native organisms, the other crabs and the fishes, shrimps that are not being, sort of the target of a management effort, and remove the green crabs, even if the trap stays in the same place for the health of all of the other critters that are coming into the traps. It's important to do that daily. That said, the question about whether the trapping protocol is consistent across the region, it is, for the data that's shown in this figure, it is not. This is as I mentioned, the result of 50 groups that are working, and there are some variations in, for instance, what types of traps people are using, in what types of bait people are using, and how many traps they're setting on any given day. All of these factors mean there's some variability. That variability is important to enabling a management effort to be adaptive and address changes that are happening in real time. But it does limit the ability that we have to, say that we looked just as hard in one of those dots as another dot. And we know that how hard we look will impact what we end up finding and how much confidence we have in the size of the population based on our findings. So for that purpose, that's where actually, the sister program to Molt Search comes in handy, which is the Crab Team Monitoring Network. That's Lisa shared the map earlier that has layers for the 67 sites that are monitored with a consistent protocol once per month, April through September, in a way that enables us to more carefully, more robustly track changes over space and time. So that's a really good question.
Thanks, Emily. And before you get into kind of takeaways about the whole state, can you just make this connection for us about like the Molt Searcher role in this work as you talk so much about trapping?
Yes. So trapping is a really resource intensive activity. There are only so many traps in the state and only so many people who can do it. The Molt Search contribution is to help us widen the lens of where we can look for green crab and figure out how to direct resources based on a different way of looking, different way of searching for evidence of their presence. So, for instance, in the case of the detections that Lisa was talking about, those are detections where Molt searchers found a green crab shell. That means green crabs were living pretty close by, somewhere relatively close. And so what that does is enables us to communicate with management partners. Oh, there's a green crab somewhere in this place we haven't seen. And that enables them to bring their traps and focus their efforts on figuring out more about where that molt might have come from. On the flip side of that, many molt surveys come up without finding European green crab. Frankly, that's my favorite kind of survey, right? Like we're looking really hard for something, but it's always this kind of funny thing where finding it is not as, carries some weight. So those efforts, and just like the zeros on this map, are help us define areas where we have looked for green crab and failed to find evidence. And that gives us a little bit of assurance that we are, not missing something. The harder we look for something and fail to find it, the more confidence we have that we aren't missing something, that it is truly an absence. But this, so in sort of tandem with trapping, the Molt search sort of coverage enables us to get that information to managers and help them sort of prioritize.
Great. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks for asking. So in thinking about sort of what some of the snapshot take-homes for what we saw last year happening in European green crab, and where we find ourselves now at what feels, even though it's May, it's the beginning of crab season 2026. I wanted to share some of the following sort of big picture trends that we saw statewide. So first, if you recall back 2 years, we had a pretty strong El Nino event in 2024. It wasn't the strongest we've had in a while, but what that means is that's always a quote, good year for green crabs. The green crabs benefit from the warmer temperatures and the sort of water movement. And that El Nino event, even though it happened in 2024, it actually showed us, it showed up in 2025 as well, with some of the new detections, so the new locations where green crabs were found in 2025 were actually crabs that had arrived there in 2024. And that meant that there was a strong, quote, early season. We had the early months of the trapping season were abnormally strong in terms of catching a lot more crabs than they usually are. There's crabs will, dependent on the temperature in terms of how active they are and how willing they are to enter traps. And so the warm water meant that they were more willing to enter traps at a time we don't usually see as many. Okay, also, what we saw in 2025 is that the sites where green crab are present on the coast are increasingly influencing, that influence is sort of drifting into the Salish Sea. We can see this a lot in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, where along the strait last year, particularly in the western part of the Strait of Juan de Fuca, the populations increased looking more like the coastal populations than they do like the Salish Sea populations of green crabs. And so what that tells us is that a strong year on the coast will bleed over a little bit to the Salish Sea sites. And that highlights potentially a geographic place of interest for searching for molt searchers, particularly along the Strait of Juan de Fuca, potentially finding sites in between where we know green crabs are, where it might be worth seeing if green crabs have spread to those other habitats as well. The Salish Sea also has somewhat distinct dynamics on the timing of these things, and so we're starting to learn how those two geographies differ in terms of what time of year we see very small crabs showing up. Okay, and from that last map, you might have noticed that some of the regions where green crabs haven't yet been found include southern Hood Canal and southern Puget Sound. Nevertheless, these are some super critical sites to be searching for in terms of molts. That's because a lot of the trapping effort needs to be dedicated in places where green crabs are known to try to draw those populations down. And so sometimes it's hard to devote as much trapping as we would like in the locations where we don't yet have evidence that green crabs are present. So I think particularly for molt searchers, I am highly encouraging folks to consider these places as really good candidates to help the state stay ahead of the invasion and look in the beaches in the south end of Puget Sound. Okay, and now thinking ahead to 2026, here's some thoughts that I have to share. First, you probably felt last winter that it took a long time to get cold, and the crabs felt that too. Actually, our cold water temperatures didn't come until really March or April. And what that meant is that the trappers that were out working over the winters had more time. They had a greater window that they could be really effective in pulling out crabs. Maybe we'll see that, tamp down populations because we had a longer period of the year. We don't know yet, but we're looking to find out. Okay, and then as you heard me mention in the last slide, that El Niños are really, unfortunately, beneficial to green crab, and unfortunately, a very strong El Niño is predicted this year. What that means that we anticipate in terms of green crabs is, again, like in 2024, more spread to new sites. And that might mean sites beyond the range where they're found. So that's the emphasis on Southern Hood Canal and Southern Puget Sound. And then also sites between known sites. So this could mean green crabs are expanding the types of habitat they use. And whereas they might currently or previously have been existing in little pockets, but a gap in between, we might start to find them filling in some of those gaps on the map. We expect it also to mean that there's high recruitment. That means a lot of the tiniest crabs are likely to start showing up mid to late summer. And often those crabs are easier to find as molts before they're large enough to really want to take the risk of going into a trap. In the Salish Sea, that timing's likely to be late summer. It's actually already happening in the coastal estuaries. The coastal estuaries and potentially the Strait of Juan de Fuca, remember it's this sort of transition zone, might start to see some of those tiny crabs showing up in May. There's often a little bit different timing there. So my sort of parting advice when thinking about what's going on in the state through the lens of molt search is search early, search broadly, and search often. And I think that's the best recipe for success. So that's what I have to share today. I think I'm also, would love to hear what you are curious about with respect to what's going on with green crab in Washington. So I'm available for a few questions now, and then we'll also stick around at the end if there's more interest.
Yeah, if there's any questions now that you want to raise your hand for or type into the chat, we can pause here for just a few minutes and see if any curiosities can be answered while Emily's in the room.
Two points if you can name the beach where this was taken in the chat.
Kim's curious what kinds of new habitats you're finding green crab in.
Awesome. Perfect transition, Kim. So this photo, now is a spoiler that I've just put the quiz out there. This photo is actually from the beach at the Ozette Triangle, which is on, south of the Macaw Reservation on the northwestern part of Washington's outer coast. So this is in the early days of green crab invasion. Green crabs were largely confined to really low energy, soft sediment habitats, low wave action, stinky, muddy places. And that's still where we observe the greatest densities of green crabs. Those are the habitats in which they have the highest survival rates. However, as the invasion progresses and there are more and more crabs potentially out there to fuel population growth, the thing that can happen is they start to survive at a population level a little bit better in these habitats that originally weren't, survivable for them. And one of those is this Ozette Beach here is a sort of rocky bench. And at low tide, it's very quiet. High tide, it can get very high wave energy. But the Macaw tribe has been trapping out here for the past couple years and seeing a fair number of green crabs. This is just a reminder that based on the biology of the crab, the entire shoreline of Washington state is survivable but some habitats they're going to do better than others. And as their population grows, they're going to expand out from those top tier habitats to include places that are higher energy, potentially deeper intertidal elevation, so moving down into eelgrass territory and those types of things.
Great. And in our last 3 minutes or so here, I have 2 other questions for you. One from Michelle asking about collaboration with Canada and Canadian counterparts in BC. And one from Julie about how trapping really works. Can people set out a trap in their community, specifically about Camano Island and trapping there? And if you have time, something about recreational shellfishers. And we'll try and get around to any of these we don't answer, either later on today or over email follow-ups.
Sounds great. Yes, there is collaboration with Canadian counterparts in BC, going back almost a decade to a Salish Sea Transboundary Action Plan with colleagues at Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And since that time, their efforts and interest has grown. There are some piloted localized removal efforts and management efforts, as well as science going on there. So good conversations, obviously, even though we're dealing with different jurisdictional considerations. Great question about how to get started on trapping. So trapping for European green crab requires special permitting and training. So there's not currently a way for folks who just want to individually, privately trap on their local beaches for green crabs. And this is in part to reduce the potential for harming other species and habitats. And so the best way to get involved if you do want to trap for green crab as a sort of a volunteer or private community member is to connect through Crab Team's monitoring network. So the sister program to Molt Search. And we can probably provide you more resources on that. Good question about recreational shellfishers. It's definitely our goal to get information about detecting green crab or identifying them to all groups that use the beach and can potentially report them. And so WDFW Fish and Wildlife, I know they include green crab I think even in the shellfishing permit, there's like a green crab identification. Maybe it's the recreational Dungeness crab. A green crab identification module that is part of the sort of getting your catch card for the year. So that having that other eyes on the beach in addition is a really important part of the overall effort to look at a lot of coastline.
Well, thank you so much, Emily, and thank you everyone for chiming in with your curiosities and questions. We're always a resource, and I've shared in the chat our email address that goes to our shared inbox where you can ask questions of Emily and the rest of our team, or ask about how to get more involved, or get some of these questions answered that have now come up for you on green crab. But we also, in the Molt Search program, focus on native Dungeness crabs, which we are lucky to have Hannah Brown here to talk to us all about. But before we do, it's only right that we pause for another lightning round, which is to spot that Dungeness crab. A little reminder on identification. So which of these 2 native crabs is our Dungeness crab, A or B? And as you're thinking, as you're scratching your heads, I'm just going to walk through what we look for when we're identifying crabs. The first thing, as we mentioned with the European green crab, is we look at the shape of their shells. Crabs of the same species will have the same shape. What we notice here is, boy, those are both oval crabs. They're wider than they are long, and they're the same shape. So that's not quite giving us a clue. It also makes us remember there's one more native crab that's pretty common that also has this oval shape. So that adds more question marks to our minds. The next step with these 3 similarly oval-shaped crabs is looking at the rostrum, the area between their eyes. And with this new one I've thrown in the mix, you can see it protrudes quite far out from its eyes, both on top and between its eyes. Whereas these 2 we started with, A and B, are very even between the eyes. So this one down here wearing almost a baseball cap is our native red rock crab. That's not our Dungeness crab. So which of these two similar ones is our Dungeness? We look then at one last common feature, the marginal teeth. All of these oval crabs have that similar, many. These have 10 teeth on the outside of their eyes here. Um, and so to distinguish between these two, we zoom in at the very edge. The Dungeness crab, as we may remember, is distinct because at its widest point, that is its 10th tooth and it sticks out quite far. This one over on the left here has just a little notch. If we were to run our fingernail there, we'd feel that notch and we would know that that one on the left is our graceful crab. And many of you are Dungeness crab experts, seeing B on the right as our Dungeness crab with that widest tooth as its 10th tooth. So Hannah will talk to us all about this Dungeness side of the data. She's a graduate student at the University of Washington, just now finishing up her thesis work focused on the Molt Search data set, looking at how your Molt Search reports compare and support data sets we already have in Washington to learn about Dungeness crab. So volunteers who set light traps and all of the fisher folks pulling out mature Dungeness crab. So she has now plugged in this 3-year-old data set that you all have helped to create on the Dungeness side of things. And without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Lisa. As Lisa mentioned, I'm finishing up my graduate degree, and I think my computer's also kind of feeling that. So my speaker's a little bit weird, or my audio. So if you can't hear me, please let me know. If I'm speaking too loud, please let me know.
You sound great.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa. But if anything changes, just holler and I'll try to fix it. Okay, I'm so excited to be here with you all today. I've just been thinking about Molt Search and Dungeness crab for the past 2 years. I'm seeing some familiar names that I've seen your Molt Searches, and my work wouldn't be possible without the Molt Search program, the people who make it happen, and all of you who are going out and gathering data. So just at the beginning, just a huge thank you to all of you. So I was really interested in this data set because I think it has a lot of implications for Dungeness crab management in Puget Sound. It's a really cool data set. It's spatially very large. It's been 3 years now, so temporally quite large, and it's only adding to it every day. Very exciting. So big overall picture, I am looking into, can Dungeness crab molt data help us look at stock assessment? So how many crabs are actually out there? Which sounds like a very simple question, but it's actually really hard to pinpoint. And there's so much fishery science in every different fishery trying to answer this very simple sounding question. So as Emily mentioned, trapping is very energy intensive, it's time intensive, it's personnel intensive. And if we can gather information about Dungeness crab just by evidence of them via their molts, that could be really powerful. And so that's the big overall dream. How can this be slotted into stock assessment in some way? Also tracking trends. So how are crab doing across space and time? There's current closures in South Sound and South Hood Canal. And I'm looking into, can these molt data kind of help us look at maybe why crab aren't doing so well in some places and doing better in others. And another big part of this is also linking life stages. So crab go through different stages of life. They start out when they hatch and become little larvae, and they float around in the water column. And there's really cool research being done with larval data, and I can talk about that more later if there's time. But we have some really great data on crab when they're itty bitty. And then we also have lots of good information on them when they're coming out of the fishery. There's commercial, recreational data. There's also kind of some independent trapping done by managers, but we don't have a lot of information about juvenile crab. They're a little bit too small for traps. Traps are not typically happening where they're happening. And this is a cute little photo that I took. I actually found this crab in a trap with some adult Dungeness crab, and it actually fell out of the bottom when we pulled it out. So we are seeing that this mold search data is picking up crab when they're in this juvenile stage. Which is just so very exciting. And we can see, you know, maybe if there's an area that has a lot of larvae and then we're not seeing juvenile crab, there's information there. We can pinpoint there's something happening in between these two stages. So very exciting that Molt Search can be looking at this. And then I'm also here to kind of share what I found looking at this, learning about this data set and how it applies to you when you go out and gather data. So one thing that I've learned is that high quality photos are really, really important. I have been mentoring an undergraduate student who's going back to look at photos at the beginning of this program where Dungeness crab measurement data wasn't taken, and we can actually, if there's some sort of measurement tool in the photo, we can measure that virtually. So we can go back and get more information. And I could see a world in which somebody's really interested in hairy helmet crab and they want to go back through these photos and measure and look at how many there are. And so high quality photos really help this work go even further. So getting that measurement tool in there, making sure it's at a good angle, making sure it's not fuzzy. These are all really super, super helpful from the researcher side. Also timing, Lisa mentioned this up at the top, and my next slide just has kind of a summarized histogram of all of that. Winter surveys are really, really important, and it makes sense that they would drop off. It's not like maybe everybody's most favorite time to go to the beach. It's cold, it's rainy, but I've been making some models, and I currently can't tell a difference between the number of Dungeness crab per survey in the summer versus the winter. And that very well may be true, but I don't feel confident about that because I just don't have enough surveys in the winter to kind of make that comparison. So I would encourage you to go out in the winter. It could be a fun way to get out of the house, maybe get rid of some of that Seattle freeze if you're in Seattle. Another really, really big important thing for research is zeros. So if you go out and you don't see any Dungeness crab, this photo actually doesn't have any Dungeness crab in it. That's still really, really interesting to researchers. You can picture me jumping up and down for joy if a zero comes in, because it's really, really helpful to know if that's a true zero. If you go out and you don't find any European green crab, yay, and you don't find any Dungeness crab, and then you don't send that information in, we won't know that you didn't find anything. So zeros are really, really important and helpful. So I encourage you to please send those in. And then I'm also looking at other aspects of the data set as well. So like I mentioned, this is just, we've already seen this. We can move past this, just talking about more in the summer. But this is one of my figures that I'll be presenting next week. On the x-axis, we have megalope per survey, so that's larval crab. And on the y-axis, this is Dungeness crab molts per survey. These are averages. And each little point represents a different management area in Puget Sound. So we're kind of seeing this curve, like if you kind of squint at it, you can see that there's this relationship between megalope and molts, which, I mean, makes sense. They are related, but it's really exciting that this work that you all are going out and doing, that is reflecting what we would expect based on the biology of the crab. This one down in the bottom right, that's Northern Hood Canal. So that one's a little bit different and maybe weird. And I'm hoping can maybe lead to more research in that area about why that spot is different. But I just wanted to share one of my figures. I'm presenting my work next week. And I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. Oh, and here's my email. Please email me. I love talking about this stuff. I've been thinking about it for 2 years. I want to hear from you. I won't be able to change anything from my presentation or my write-up probably, but I really want this work to continue. And these data are only getting more valuable the more time that you all are out there doing this work. So thank you again, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Hannah. And we do have a few minutes here for questions. If anything comes to mind for you in terms of like, what do Dungeness crab researchers know, and what kinds of questions are Dungeness crab researchers interested in learning about, or how is it that the molt search protocols are being useful in ways that other existing research isn't? Any of those questions, I'm sure Hannah would be well poised to answer. Is there anything else coming to mind for folks on what she's found in the data or what she knows about the scientific questions being asked in Washington on this particular species? You can raise your hand or type it into the chat. I'll have you muse a little while folks are thinking on how is it that the state of Washington is able to tell us like how many Dungeness crabs we can capture if what you're saying is true, that molt search reports are like your main source of data on these juvenile years of this important species. How do we do it now?
That's a great question. So right now, most of the stock assessment is done using landings data. So looking at how many crab are coming out of the commercial fishery and the recreational fishery. There's a lot of fishery dependent data that are being used to estimate number of crab and projecting out into the future. And I won't go too far into this because I could talk about it forever, but there's co-management of Dungeness crab in Washington state. So the treaty tribes get 50% of the catch and the state gets the other 50%. So there's also data coming in from tribal fisheries as well. And we're not at a point yet where we can use larval numbers to project out 4 years. And I think that being able to link those life stages might make both the molt data and the larval data, I feel like it could just amplify that, because right now we do have a lot of fishery dependent data, and these are both fishery independent data sources. But yeah, mostly landings data and some fishery independent trapping that happens with partners. So going out with baited traps and looking at what's out there.
Great. And I have a question I'll queue up for Emily just after about green crabs and how they came to be here. But for you, Hannah, Kim's wondering if you can tell us about what conclusions you're going to share at your thesis presentation next week. What have you been able to conclude from your work on these data sets?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think my biggest takeaway from my work is that these molt data are useful. They're showing a signal, and I've made all these different models and used different management regions, and it's still showing the signal that the larval and the molts data are connected, and we're seeing that through this data set. So this data set is telling us something that we would be expecting. And what else? What else? I'm working on, this is maybe too last minute, we'll see, but I'm working on a model looking at different cohorts of Dungeness crabs. So a year 1, year 2. And if these data could be used to look at different cohorts, that could be really useful for stock assessment. A lot of different fisheries use cohort information to project forward into the future. If we could use these molt data to say, oh, we've had this huge increase in year 1 crab, and we can kind of monitor that across time, we might be able to increase the amount of Dungeness crab we could take out in 2 or 3 years after that. I don't have any like super solid. I feel like my work is more saying like, look, this is working. Molt data are working. We're seeing these signals. So that's my biggest takeaway. And I hope that I can set this up for other researchers to take it and run and do more cool models and whatever they want to do with it.
It's really amazing that you have come in as like really the first researcher to try and dive into this participatory science data set. And it's always a bit of a question, like have all of our efforts to make these protocols useful for answering researcher questions, like has it worked? Do researchers want to ask the kinds of questions that can be answered with the methods that we've set up? And is the data clean enough and free of noise in a sufficient way to show signal and to show relationship? So you've done really amazing, incremental as science is, work to kind of prove the concept of Molt search here on the Dungeness side. And we're excited to see you go and graduate and excited to see what researchers do next now that you've laid this groundwork. So thanks for being here with us today. And I'll let Emily take this quick last question about just green crab in general here in Washington. How'd they come to be here?
Yeah, good question. And because I might not be able to answer it before we hop off, I'm going to drop a link in the chat that actually has a short video. It's about 8 minutes that gives you a longer answer to this question. But the short answer is green crabs in Washington actually came first from the east coast of North America. They were brought first to San Francisco Bay, likely as stowaways in seaweed that was used as packing material for live seafood or live baitworm shipments from northern New England. Through a combination of forensics and genetics and so forth that we get to that. Green crabs have been on the east coast of the United States for 200 years, but the first confirmed detection on the west coast was 1989. And from there, they spread mostly northward all the way up. Latest range limit so far is about Ketchikan, Alaska in the past couple of years. And they're doing that spread primarily in their tiny larval phase. When they hatch out of eggs, they spend up to a couple months getting washed around on the currents. So that spread from the very small number of crabs that probably were accidentally brought to the West Coast precipitated a pretty big range expansion. So feel free to dive into that video with more details if you want more of the nitty gritty.
Thanks, Emily. And I'll pass it over to Jonathan just to close us out here about what to do now with all this great information.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. So as we wrap up, we invite you all to set aside time with us later this summer. So we have a Molt Blitz happening on Friday, June 26th, and we're hoping to build our largest single day data set of Molt searches yet. Trying to get as many people out doing a search on that day, Friday, June 26th, as possible. So make it social, invite your coworkers, bring your neighbors, take your family. And you'll also have the opportunity to go to a bunch of the open on the beach open houses, practice training sessions. We'll have expert trainers at beaches all over the Puget Sound, hopefully one close to your local beach. So for more information on that, go to the Molt Search website. And lastly, with the last few seconds we have between now and that Molt Blitz, Salish Seawide Molt Blitz, we have a bunch of other training opportunities. So if this is your first experience with Molt Search and first time learning about Molt Search and European green crabs, and you probably have lots of questions, come to one of our trainings. There's a bunch happening around the Puget Sound. We have a virtual training coming up over lunch again on June 24th. These trainings will take you through a fuller story of the green crab invasion in Washington and train you on how to identify common crab species as well as the European green crab, and take you through all the steps of the Molt Search protocol and how to use the MyCoast app. So again, for Lisa put in the chat, I think, all of the more information where to find that. So with that, thank you all for joining us today over lunch, and we hope to see you all on the beach or coming from the data set soon, and we'll be sticking around for any last questions that may come to mind. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, everybody. Awesome, Greg. All right.
Shirley, it was nice to see you here. Rarely do I get to brag about your accomplishments with you in the room. So thanks for joining us. Well, thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Hannah, for
Thank
taking the time and sharing with us some of your data. That was incredible.
yeah,
Super cool to
thank you.
see
Thank you
Molt data
so
in
much
action.
for having me. And I think Lisa sent my info for my presentation next week, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm
Thanks
gonna
so
try to
much.
make it. Be good
It'll
to
be
hear.
recorded also, so I can
Okay.
send that out. Yeah.
Very cool.
Cool. Awesome. Well, good luck. Best of luck in finishing up the thesis. I know how crazy that last like time is and trying to get all of the ducks in a row.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. With that, shall we close it out?
That's for the day. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Okay. Fabulous.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.